The Kennedy curse never sleeps, it just waits. On December 30th, 2025, the world froze as the heartbreaking news broke. Tatiana Schlossberg, JFK's beloved granddaughter, has died at just 35. But this wasn't a reckless accident. It was a silent, brutal war against a rare blood cancer that struck. Now, her eldest sister, Rose, who donated her own bone marrow in a desperate bid to save her, offers a glimpse into a tragedy that defies words. A mother of two, a warrior gone too soon. Tonight, we expose the devastating final chapter of Camelot's quietest hero and the sacrifice that couldn't change fate. To understand the depth of the shadow that has just fallen over the Kennedy dynasty, we must first look at the light that preceded it. For decades, Caroline Kennedy, the last surviving child of JFK and Jackie, achieved something deemed almost impossible in her family. She raised her children in peace. She gave the world three distinct gifts, three faces that carried the legacy of Camelot into the 21st century without the chaos that usually followed it. There is Rose, the eldest, born in 1988, Tatiana, the middle child, born in 1990, and Jack, the youngest, born in 1993. For years, they were the New York Kennedys, private, grounded, and fiercely protective of one another. But it is the bond between the two sisters, Rose and Tatiana, that sits at the heart of this story. Rose Schlossberg has long been a subject of public fascination simply because she is the living, breathing image of her grandmother, Jackie Kennedy. She carries that same dark hair, the same stoic grace, and the same sharp wit. But behind the scenes, Rose was more than just a look-alike. She was the anchor. As the eldest, she forged a connection with Tatiana that went beyond blood. They were partners in a life that was intentionally designed to be quiet. They navigated the streets of Manhattan, not as celebrities, but as young women carving out their own identities, shielded from the glare that had burned so many of their relatives. And then there was Tatiana. If Rose was the anchor, Tatiana Schlossberg was the compass. She was, by all accounts, the quiet intellectual of the family. She didn't seek the cameras. She didn't pursue public office like her grandfather or her brother Jack. Instead, she pursued the truth. Tatiana became an award-winning journalist for the New York Times, focusing her sharp mind on the climate crisis. She wrote a book, Inconspicuous Consumption, trying to save the planet one sentence at a time. She was serious, she was humble, and she was deeply kind. By early 2024, Tatiana had built what looked like the perfect American life. She was happily married to George Moran, a doctor, a healer, whom she had met at Yale. They were the picture of a modern, successful couple. They had a toddler son, terrified and delighted by the world, and they were preparing to welcome their second child. It was a time of immense joy. The Kennedy curse felt like a dusty chapter of a history book, something that belonged to the past, not to this vibrant, healthy 34-year-old woman. Let's freeze the frame on May 2024. Because to understand the heroism of Tatiana Schlossberg, you have to understand the sheer cruelty of the moment the clock stopped. It was supposed to be the happiest time of her life. Tatiana was 34 years old, glowing with the anticipation of her second child. She wasn't just healthy, she was a marvel of physical endurance. In her final essay, she revealed a detail that now breaks the heart. Just days before her diagnosis, she swam a full mile in the ocean. She felt strong. She felt invincible. She was a woman in her prime, preparing to bring new life into the world. But biology can be a cruel storyteller. What Tatiana thought was the typical exhaustion of a third trimester, the heavy legs, the shortness of breath, turned out to be a siren song of something far more sinister. She went in for what she thought was a routine checkup, the kind expectant mothers do a dozen times. She expected to hear a heartbeat. She expected to hear about due dates. Instead, she heard a silence in the room that no patient ever wants to hear. The blood tests came back, and they didn't make sense. The numbers were catastrophic. In the span of a single afternoon, the conversation shifted from nurseries and diapers to oncology and survival rates. The diagnosis was a hammer blow, acute myeloid leukemia, AML. But it wasn't just cancer. That would have been terrifying enough. It was a specific rare genetic mutation known as inversion 3. This is the detail that shocked the medical team. This mutation is a monster usually found in the elderly and bodies worn down by time. It had no business being in the blood of a vibrant, healthy young mother. It is known for being aggressive resistant to chemotherapy and notoriously difficult to cure. The timing felt like a twisted joke. Tatiana was standing on the precipice of birth and death simultaneously. She was 9 months pregnant. Her baby girl was ready to arrive at the exact moment her own body began to fail. If the diagnosis was the storm, what followed was a display of courage that would have made their grandfather JFK proud. The timing was nothing short of biblical. Tatiana gave birth to her second child, a healthy baby girl, amidst the chaos of blood draws and oncology consultations. In a single week, she experienced the supreme joy of bringing life into the world and the crushing terror of fighting to keep her own. But she wasn't fighting alone. In the sterile hallways of the hospital, a desperate search began. To survive. Acute myeloid leukemia. Tatiana needed a bone marrow transplant. She needed a donor whose genetic makeup was a near-perfect mirror of her own. The doctors turned to the family. And in a twist of fate that feels almost scripted, the answer lay within the person who had stood beside her since the very beginning, Rose. Rose Schlossberg stepped forward. We often talk about the Kennedy legacy in terms of politics and power, but here the legacy was stripped down to its rawest element, blood. Rose wasn't just the big sister anymore. She was the lifeline. The doctors confirmed it. She was a perfect match. The procedure that followed was more than a medical intervention. It was a spiritual transfer. Rose underwent the harvesting procedure, allowing doctors to extract the stem cells from her own body to replace the failing marrow in Tatiana's. It was a profound, ancient act of sacrifice. Rose was quite literally giving a piece of herself to rebuild her sister. And for a beautiful, shining moment, it worked. This is the chapter of the story where we find the happiness you were looking for, the miracle amidst the tragedy. The transplant was a success. Tatiana's body accepted Rose's cells. The cancer retreated. The months that followed were, by Tatiana's own account, a golden time. It was a second chance at life bought and paid for by her sister's love. Tatiana was able to leave the hospital. She returned to her apartment in New York not as a patient, but as a mother. Imagine Rose watching Tatiana hold her newborn daughter, knowing that the strength in Tatiana's arms came from her own sacrifice. Imagine the dinners they shared, the walks in the park, the simple mundane moments that suddenly felt like miracles. For a brief window, the Kennedy curse was broken. They had won. Tatiana wrote about this period with a heartbreaking gratitude. She described the feeling of her sister's blood running through her veins, a constant reminder that she was never alone. She described the simple ecstasy of swimming in the ocean again, of watching her toddler son learn new words, of looking at her husband George and believing they would grow old together. It was a time of intense closeness for the clan. Caroline Kennedy saw her two daughters united by a bond that went deeper than DNA. They were survivors. The laughter returned to the Schlossberg household. The fear of death was replaced by the chaotic, wonderful noise of raising two young children. Rose had given Tatiana the greatest gift one human can give another time. She gave her the time to bond with her baby girl. She gave her the time to hear her son say, "I love you." She gave her the time to write, to think, and to love. But for those few precious months, the tragedy waited outside the door. Just as the family began to exhale, just as Rose started to believe that her sacrifice had rewritten the ending, the darkness returned. It didn't come back with the crash of thunder. It came back in the quiet numbers of a routine lab report. The inversion 3 mutation, that rare and aggressive beast living in Tatiana's blood, had proven to be more resilient than anyone feared. It had survived the chemotherapy. It had survived the radiation. And devastatingly, it had found a way to outsmart even the healthy cells Rose had so lovingly given. The relapse was the cruelest twist of all. It turned the golden time into a fleeting memory. The doctors who had once spoken of cures now spoke in a different, heavier dialect. They saw Tatiana down, this young mother with a baby on her hip and a toddler at her knee, and gave her a timeline that no human being should ever have to hear. "A year," they said. "Maybe." Imagine the silence in that room. Imagine Rose standing there realizing that even her own bone marrow, the very essence of her life force, wasn't enough to shield her little sister. The Kennedy curse hadn't been broken. It had simply been waiting. But it is here in the face of an inescapable deadline that Tatiana Schlossberg showed the world exactly who she was. She didn't retreat into bitterness. She didn't hide. Instead, she turned to the one weapon she had mastered: her pen. In November 2025, just a month before she would leave us, The New Yorker published her final essay titled "A Battle with My Blood." It wasn't just an article. It was a last will and testament written in ink and tears. It was a window into the soul of a woman who knew she was saying goodbye. And what she revealed in those pages was heartbreaking. She spoke of a specific, haunting guilt, a guilt that is unique to the children of the Kennedy dynasty. She wrote, "I have spent my life trying to be a good daughter, trying to bring joy to my mother to protect her from more pain. And now I feel like I am bringing the ultimate tragedy to her doorstep." Think about that. In her final days, Tatiana wasn't just grieving for herself, she was grieving for her mother Caroline. She knew the history. She knew that Caroline had buried a father, a mother, and a brother. Tatiana felt a crushing responsibility to not be another tragedy, and the realization that she couldn't stop it was a torment all its own. But the essay also revealed a fierce protective anger. For the first time, the quiet journalist spoke up about the controversies swirling around her own family name. She wrote with raw honesty about her fear of the medical landscape changing in America. She criticized the skepticism around vaccines and science, a pointed, painful message given that her own cousin, RFK Jr., was leading the charge against the very medical establishments she relied on. She described the terror of needing specific drugs to manage her cancer drugs that were suddenly becoming political targets because of their use in other procedures. It wasn't a political manifesto. It was the desperate plea of a dying mother who just wanted to stay alive long enough to see her daughter walk. She wrote, "I realized that the science that could save me was fragile not just biologically, but politically." And then she touched on the deepest fear of all, not death, but oblivion. In the most gut-wrenching passages, Tatiana opened up about her children. She wrote about the toddler son who was just learning to say her name and the infant daughter who would never know the warmth of her hug. "I worry," she wrote, "that they will not remember me. I worry that I will be nothing more than a picture on a mantle, a story told at holidays, a ghost in their lives." This is the glimpse that breaks us. It is the universal nightmare of every parent. Tatiana spent her final weeks frantically trying to leave traces of herself behind. Letters, recordings, memories, anything to ensure that when the lights went out, her love would still remain. Rose, who had been the physical donor, now became the emotional vault. She became the witness to this frantic, beautiful preparation. She watched her sister pack a lifetime of mothering into a few short months, knowing that the clock was ticking louder every day. The essay was Tatiana's final gift to the world, but it was also a plea: don't let me be forgotten. The calendar turned to December 2025. Outside the windows of their New York apartment, the city was dressing itself in the lights of the holiday season. The world was busy buying gifts, planning parties, and looking forward to the new year. But inside the Schlossberg home, the clock was moving at a different, slower pace. The world was expanding with joy, but for the Kennedy Schlossberg clan, the world was shrinking down to the size of a single room. According to the glimpses shared by the family, Tatiana's final weeks were not defined by the chaos of a hospital emergency room, but by the sacred quiet of home. She had made the decision to stop the aggressive treatments that were ravaging her body without stopping the cancer. She chose instead to spend her remaining energy on what mattered most: presence. Rose was there. The sister who had given her blood, who had shared her DNA, was now simply sharing her silence. One can only imagine the weight in Rose's heart as she sat by the bedside. She had done everything humanly possible. She had literally carved out a piece of herself to save her sister, and yet nature was taking its course. But in those final days, the bond between them didn't break. It solidified. Rose wasn't just a witness to death. She was the guardian of Tatiana's transition, holding the hand that used to hold hers when they were children crossing the street. The atmosphere in the house was a mix of immense love and unbearable sorrow. Caroline Kennedy, the mother who has walked behind too many coffins, faced this new tragedy with her characteristic stoicism. But make no mistake, this was a pain unlike any other. To lose a father is to lose your past. To lose a child is to lose your future. Watching Caroline care for her dying daughter, the daughter who had tried so hard to protect her from pain, is an image that tears at the soul of every parent watching this. And then there was George, Tatiana's husband, a doctor by trade, a healer by oath, forced to accept that there was no medicine left to give only love, and the children. The 3-year-old son perhaps sensing the shift in the air, playing quietly on the floor. The infant daughter sleeping in the arms of a mother who was trying to memorize the weight of her baby before her strength gave out. It was a Christmas of lasts. The last tree, the last carol, the last time the 3 siblings, Rose, Tatiana, and Jack, would be in the same room together. On the morning of December 30th, 2025, just one day before the year ended, the silence finally came. It wasn't violent. It was the peaceful, inevitable conclusion to a warrior's journey. Tatiana Schlossberg, the quiet intellectual, the fierce environmentalist, the beloved sister and mother, took her final breath surrounded by the people who were her entire world. The statement released by the family was brief, stripping away all titles and legacy to focus on the only thing that mattered. Our beautiful Tatiana passed away this morning. She will always be in our hearts. She was 35 years old. The tragedy of her passing hits us so hard because it feels so incredibly unfair. It violates the natural order of things. 35-year-olds are supposed to be tired from chasing toddlers, not tired from fighting for their lives. They are supposed to be worrying about preschool applications, not final essays. As the news broke, a collective wave of grief washed over the nation. It wasn't just because she was a Kennedy. It was because she represented the very best of a young generation, smart, caring, and deeply devoted to her family. Her death feels like a light being snuffed out before it ever truly got to shine. For Rose, for Caroline, for Jack, and for George, the new year has arrived, but it has arrived in grayscale. They are now tasked with the hardest job of all, living in a world that has one less beautiful soul in it. They must now answer the questions of a 3-year-old who wonders where mommy has gone. They must now find a way to navigate the Kennedy curse, not as a legend, but as a hollow ache in their chest. Tatiana's final days were a testament to the power of family. They showed us that while we cannot defeat death, we can choose how we face it together with dignity and wrapped in love. She didn't lose her battle. She simply finished her assignment early. And while she has left the room, the love she planted in those final precious days will grow for generations. As we close the book on this heartbreaking story, the weight of the Kennedy legacy feels heavier than usual. We have spent decades watching this family rise to the highest peaks of power and fall to the deepest valleys of tragedy. But looking at the life and death of Tatiana Schlossberg, I don't see a curse in the way the tabloids describe it. I see a resilience that is almost superhuman. I see a sister Rose who was willing to carve into her own bones to save her sibling. I see a mother Caroline who continues to stand with dignity despite a lifetime of loss. And I see a young woman who, facing the end at only 35, chose to spend her final breaths writing a love letter to her children and to the planet she fought so hard to protect. You know, folks, getting older teaches you one undeniable truth. The natural order of life is sacred. Parents are supposed to go first. We are supposed to be the ones waving goodbye. When that order is disrupted, when a mother is taken from her babies before she can teach them how to navigate the world, it leaves a scar on the universe that nothing can quite heal. This tragedy forces us to look at our own lives a little differently tonight. It reminds us that health is a crown that only the sick can see. It reminds us that the petty arguments, the political divides, and the daily frustrations that consume us are so incredibly small compared to the simple miracle of sitting at a dinner table with the people you love. Tatiana Schlossberg may not have held public office. She may not have sought the spotlight. But in her bravery, in her honesty, and in her fierce love for her family, she carried the Kennedy torch just as high as any of her forebears. She taught us that a life doesn't have to be long to be significant. Tonight, my heart goes out to those 2 little children who will grow up learning about their mother from history books and stories. And my heart breaks for Rose, who must now walk through the world with a piece of her soul missing. If you believe in the power of prayer, or simply in the power of sending good thoughts into the universe, please take a moment to leave a heart or a kind word in the comments for this family. Let's make this comment section a sanctuary of support, not a place of judgment. And if you want to join us as we continue to honor the stories that shape our world, stories of triumph, tragedy, and the human spirit, please consider subscribing to the channel. We are here to remember to learn, and to ensure that no one is forgotten. Rest in peace, Tatiana. You fought the good fight, you finished the race, and you kept the faith. Thank you for watching, and hold your loved ones a little closer tonight.